You're listening to the Soil Sisters podcast, where we dig in on family farming and ranching, regenerative agriculture, healthy living, and planting seeds in our community. We invite you to listen, subscribe, and grow with the Soil Sisters. Hi, y'all. I'm Johanna Newting, joined by my blood, soul, and soil sister, Crystal. Welcome to the show.
Hi, sister. I'm really excited about today's
Talk
guest.
about a blast from the past. We have Dr. Nelson Coulter joining us today. Of course, when we knew him back in high school, I just called him Coach. But over the years, Nelson Coulter has held a lot of titles: rancher, educator, author, musician, entrepreneur, coach, mentor, consultant, and professor. He has coached, taught, and been published in many settings. He has served in public schools of all shapes and sizes and contexts. Although his most cherished titles are the ones not attached to career identity, and those are son, husband, dad, and granddad, which, of course, I hope everyone feels that way. But Dr. Coach Coulter, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you. Glad to be here. Good to see you.
Yes. It was so fun when Sister and I went to deliver the regenerative soil textbooks to Jayton High School, to be able to sit down and hand them over to you as interim superintendent of the school that raised us.
The blessing was more mine than yours. And to the point of the textbooks, I not only have I shared those with our ag teacher, but I've also shared them with our school nurse who thinks like we do. I've shared them with our biology chemistry teacher, so she might be able to use that as a resource in her classes as well. I found the book to be, it's the Matt Powers book, by the way. I found that to be a very intriguing book, and also one that was technically a little bit beyond me in places, but useful, very useful.
Yeah. Well, there's definitely a place to start, and I love it because it can be shared across all those different areas of study, and it is foundational, and I really love it. And so, yeah, it is. There are parts of it that are beyond all of us, but it is a place to start. So I am thrilled, and that makes me so happy. Thank you for doing that.
Well, and if we're honest, nature is really beyond all of us. The miracle, how it all works.
To be
absolutely. Sure. So we would love to talk to you today about a number of things. We'd like to talk about how you found your way into this little bubble that we're in of understanding where our food comes from and living a regenerative life, to you taking a stand at one of the schools that you were working at and divorcing yourself from the National School Lunch Program and what you saw from that and kind of the effects. So we can meander through this conversation anyway, but I think probably the best place to start is, you know, what your aha moment was around food.
I guess it would have been somewhere around 2010 after I left the school where the two of you graduated. I'd been the principal there, and I left there in 2002, a rural school out in the rolling plains of West Texas. And I went to Austin and became a 6A high school principal at a couple of schools. And I worked at UT Austin for a year full time. But in the spring of 2009, my youngest daughter and her husband were teaching in a little school that most people might recognize the community from Yellowstone. The community was Guthrie, Texas, the home of the Four Sixes Ranch. And my daughter emailed me and said, "Dad, we think the superintendent's leaving here, and we think you all need to come back to West Texas and be close to your kids and grandkids." And I was a little bit dismissive of that. But finally, my lovely bride of now 49 years said, "You know, I don't care what you do, but just get a piece of paper, put the pluses and minuses, and then make your decision and let people know." And so after I put the thought into it, I went ahead and applied. And the school board there In fact, the superintendent that was the superintendent at Jayton, where you all graduated, Gary Harrell, he was the interim
Oh,
superintendent at Guthrie at
interesting.
the time. And anyway, the board decided that I was the guy that they wanted to come work in Guthrie. I had been on a bit of a rampage for a number of years at my opposition to what I felt like was overbearing state accountability requirements for schools, and had snorted and pawed the ground quite a lot, and used what little leverage that I had to try to make the case that I thought school and learning was about much more than test scores on 3 or 4 different academic tests. And so I went to Guthrie as the superintendent, and I was complaining about that issue one morning over coffee with my lovely bride. And she said, well, maybe you need to let your voice be heard. And so I immediately said, I'm almost retired. It's a fight for younger people. And she sipped her coffee and she says, maybe you need to let your voice be heard. And so I complained some more about it and told her that I was in one of the smallest school districts in the whole nation. And she sipped her coffee and she said, maybe you need to let your voice be heard. And of course, it pushed me away from the point of just commiseration and complaint to actually seeing if I could put some kind of solution on the table. And what that led me to is affiliation and association with a very progressive group of superintendents from across the state of Texas, ranging in size of school from as small as Guthrie to large school districts, suburban districts in the Metroplex, suburban districts in Houston area, Alamo Heights, San Antonio. And that group of 15 or 20 superintendents, to my surprise, felt the same way I did. They felt like the responsibility we have for our children goes far beyond how well they can score on a math test or a history test or an English language test, although those are all important. And that group of folks created what they called the visioning document for the Texas Association of School Administrators, which served as sort of a guidepost for those of us that wanted to have conversations in our community about what was really important and what we were trying to achieve. So I took that and I took the advice and counsel of some of those superintendents, particularly Dr. Stephen Waddell, who at the time was at Louisville ISD in the Metroplex, and began having conversations with our school board and with our community there in Guthrie, with the faculty, and even with the students. And so at Dr. Waddell's recommendation, I just started the conversation with, what are your highest aspirations for your children? And then I let people answer those questions. And I collected their responses. And step by step, and over most of a year, we began to bring clarity to what it was we wanted for our students after we'd had our grubby paws on them for 13 years there in Guthrie. And you can find it on the Guthrie website. It's still there. We called it the Guthrie Graduate Profile. And if you look at the 5 dimensions of that profile, you'll see there's not a lot about academic performance there. It's much more about the soft skills. It's much more about the way they think than what they think. It's much more about the way they behave and the way they choose to interact with each other, with their communities, and with the world at large, and with the planet. So we launched the Guthrie Graduate Profile. So then my lovely bride had made sense to me, get off the couch, quit complaining, and do something about it. So I was trying to do something about it. And once we created that profile, then I felt the deep responsibility to try to point everything we did at the schoolhouse every day toward those 5 dimensions of that profile and de-emphasize the state accountability system and the state testing. Yes, we were going to keep taking the test. That was a given, and I felt like we would be fine. But what I wanted to do is for us to focus our efforts in every classroom, every office, every school board meeting on that profile, those 5 dimensions of that profile. And so shortly after we kind of got rolling with that process, I had a group of elementary teachers come to my office one afternoon, and I immediately, as old as I am, and having been through many administrative battles as I have been, I immediately recognized a trick question coming. And that trick question that they pitched in front of me was, for the last 10 years, we've been spending the last hour of every school day getting ready for state testing. Would it be okay if we quit doing that and had a school garden? And I immediately said, yes. And they were shocked that I would be willing to forsake state test prep for a school garden. And they got up to started to leave the office. And I said, wait, we're not done yet. So they sat back down and I said, yes, we're going to have a school garden. Yes, we can supplant our test prep time with that. Here's how I want it to look. I want you all to approach this from a research perspective. I want you to experiment with square foot gardening. I want you to experiment with hugelkultur. I want you to experiment with raised beds. I want you to experiment with degrees of sunlight and soil embellishments. I want you to document everything. I want you to have the kids treat this as research projects. I want you to create a website to report every bit of that and provide pictures and testimonials so that not only our students, but their parents and their grandparents and people all around the planet can see what it is we're doing and why we're doing it. Well, that was a little daunting to them, but they jumped in and all guns a-blazing. And it turned out to be a marvelous thing. At the same time, I had developed concerns, not just there at Guthrie, but in the other schools that I'd worked in for the 20 years previous, at the health and well-being of not only the students that I would see walking down the hall, but the health and well-being of the adults that were serving those students. I increasingly became uncomfortable with the amount and degree of poor health outcomes that I was seeing in the adults that were serving the students. And I felt like we had to do something different. I mean, it just didn't seem right to me that I would hire a 27-year-old teacher that could barely walk up and down the stairs. And so in relation to that graduate profile and what we were trying to do there in the school garden, I happened to, at the same time, be serving on a board of directors with 6 other small school superintendents out here in the Rolling Plains area. And one of my colleagues on that board that was a superintendent in a neighboring school began to develop, and he's about my age, but at that time, this was 15 years ago, he began to develop some very serious health problems. It was difficult, it was painful to watch, as we would meet month by month, watching his health deteriorate. And then all of a sudden, his health started going back up. And that month after month, and after about 3 months of marked improvement in his health, I just asked him, I said, John, what are you doing? What are you doing? And he said, I've got a nephew that's a physician and I'm just doing what he tells me. Well, the name of that physician is Dr. Ben Edwards from the Lubbock area, and the two of you have met Dr. Edwards now. And without trying to steal Ben's thunder, he basically views, and he had trained traditionally in medicine, but the bottom line was he became dissatisfied with the outcomes he was seeing in the way he was treating his patients in the conventional methods, even though he was making a lot of money. And he began searching for answers to more holistic and long-lasting and sustainable health outcomes for his patients, which led him to association with another physician from Amarillo named Dr. Roby Mitchell. And so I think they called themselves functional integrative physicians or something like that. Basically, it was the approach to health, and Ben's 4 pillars happened to be, if I can remember them correctly, peace, nutrition, hydration,
movement.
I forget what the other one. Movement, yes, movement. That's particularly important for this old farts like me. And what I began to do then, well, at first I asked John if he would introduce me to his nephew, the physician. He did. And then it wasn't long till I'm very protective as a school superintendent and a school principal about who I allow to speak to our faculty and staff. I mean, I get constant pitches from people that want their time. Usually they're trying to sell them something, and I just don't go there. But after visiting with Dr. Edwards, I asked him if he would come out to Guthrie and visit with our faculty and staff in August when we came back and getting ready for a new school year. And he said, yeah, absolutely. And I said, well, I'll give you an hour and a half. And he said, I'd rather have a half a day. I said, I'll give you an hour and a half. And so he spoke to our faculty and staff for an hour and a half, about the middle of August. And then he walked out the back door of that conference room we were in. And as he was leaving, they started filing, lining up in front of me, some of them with tears in their eyes, saying, why didn't we know? Why didn't we know this already? Where has he been? Why are we not aware of this information? And so that started us on a very interesting journey. This is a long way to get to your question.
That's okay.
How did we end up divorcing the school lunch program? But it was incremental steps that were leading up to the eventual decision of my coming to the belief that the requirements built into the National School Lunch Program at the time were not in the best interest of the health and well-being of our students or our adults that were serving them, and that we needed to take a different approach. And so we began doing that. Let me stop my blathering right now, because you may have more specific questions about any of that I've said. I can go.
Well, I will say that when we did talk to Dr. Ben, he said that from the moment y'all met and then he talked to your staff, he was like, you were all about it. You were on it like gangbusters, like white on rice. And that's what we need, people that see it. They see the problem. They can't unsee it, and being willing to do something about it. And did you know anyone at that point that had divorced the National School Lunch Program?
Not a soul. I didn't even know if you could. I didn't know if you could. So, and that I'm not even sure I would recommend it to somebody else based on the hurdles and barriers that I had to overcome on the way.
Well, so we talked last week with Nate Sheets, and he is running for Ag Commissioner of Texas. And during that conversation, you know, I just kind of flippantly said, you know, $1.25 per meal is what's spent on food. And I wanted to go back and correct a little bit of that, because that wasn't not true. But back in 2024 was the last time I looked up these numbers. But the average school lunch cost was $3.81. But then when you extrapolate out where all these expenses go, 45% of that money goes to the staff that's preparing and cooking that food. And 10% of that goes for the overhead hard costs. And so when you're left, the amount of money that is actually spent on the actual food is $1.71 for a lunch and $1.22 for a breakfast. So I wanted to make sure everyone understood a little bit more, you know, how the money went. So they're not like, oh, she's just saying crazy numbers. That's not true. So can you fill in the gaps a little bit more about the National School Lunch Program, how it works, and what that looks like before we divorce it?
Yeah. So, man, oh man. So when I met Dr. Edwards, and my wife too, to her credit, I mean, Dr. Edwards and Dr. Roby Mitchell and my lovely bride, who is a voracious researcher, the combination of those three people really influenced my thinking about this, and they also influenced my personal behavior. So after I began visiting with Dr. Edwards and listening to his thoughts about nutrition, food, movement, hydration, and I began thinking in the more grander terms of the health and well-being of the children we were serving. At that time, when those conversations began, I mean, you can't see me very well in this video, but at that time, which was 15 years ago, I weighed 40 more pounds than I do right now. I had been on blood pressure medication for most of a decade at that time. There was not a day that had gone by for at least 10 years that I didn't take antacids of some kind or another, constant heartburn and or acid reflux. And there was not a day that would go by that I didn't take over-the-counter pain medication of some kind, Tylenol or ibuprofen or aspirin or something like that. And within just a few months of having the conversations with Dr. Edwards, Dr. Mitchell, and listening to my wife, the research that she was doing in relation to what they were saying, she's one of the world's premier skeptics. If you say something to her, she just doesn't take it on the surface. She starts digging. So my personal health and well-being, and I thought I was a reasonably healthy person, but my personal health and well-being began to improve significantly. So I became convinced as I looked at the stuff that we were serving across the counter at the cafeteria. I was having a hard time reconciling Cocoa Puffs and Fruit Loops as being nutritional and beneficial to the health and well-being of our students. And those are just a couple of numerous examples. When Dr. Edwards spoke to our faculty and staff that August, the person at the front of the line after he left was the lady in charge of our cafeteria, who, as it turns out, had Hashimoto's disease and didn't even know it. And Dr. Edwards helped coach her to health eventually. But it would be a huge barrier for anybody else that was trying to do this, because if the person in charge of the cafeteria is not going to buy in, you don't have a prayer. You really don't. So what I began doing is having conversations with Pat about how can we begin altering what we're serving and still comply with the National School Lunch Programs. I said, can we begin serving only organically raised produce and still be in compliance? And she said, well, I think so. So then that put me on the search for trying to source only organic produce, which is harder than you might think, or it certainly was 15 years ago. Easier now than it used to be, depending on how much you trust the labeling. But what I ended up doing on that front was reaching out to natural grocers in Lubbock. And I made contact with the manager of that store and told him who I was. And I indicated that if he thought I was crazy, he would not be alone. But I was wondering if we might use them as a source for organic produce. For our
and just for context sake, how far is Guthrie from Lubbock?
100 miles. Between 90 and 100 miles, yeah. Guthrie's a long way from everywhere, but he was all in. And so that was the first step. Okay, we're going to supplant the produce that we're getting through the conventional methods with the organic. And then the next conversation Pat and I had, can the meats that we're serving, can we shift those to organic, no hormones, no antibiotics? And the beef was fairly easy because we sat right in the middle of the 4-6's ranch and we always bought beef from them. The process had historically been, we would buy the calves when they came off the mother cows and the ranch would ship however many we were buying to the feedlot where they would stay for 90 or 120 days and fatten them up. And then they would go to the processor, and that's what we would feed to the cafeteria. And so I asked the ranch manager, I told him what we were up to. And I said, would it be possible if we just take the calves off the mama cows and take them straight to the processor rather than going to the feed yard? And he said, yeah, absolutely. So that was, the beef part was fairly easy. Pork and chicken, was markedly more difficult finding sources, although as we did that for 6 years before I retired, with each passing year, it got a little easier to source organically and clean meat. That's the way I think of it. And then, and then there was the dairy products. And so I was able to negotiate with natural grocers about shifting to whole milk and real butter rather than 2% or skim milk, chocolate milk, pink milk, whatever that's called, strawberry milk, and margarine. We just eliminated all those and we went with whole milk and real butter. So that was the beginning of it. And all that stuff, most of it was compliant with the National School Lunch
Well,
Program.
I mean, how would it not
But
be compliant with the school lunch program? I mean, you're overachieving
Well,
their program.
Exactly.
Well, and to be fair, there was some record of other districts in the nation trying. And of particular interest to me was Denver, Colorado. They had been making some moves in that direction and actually growing some of their own food. We were not completely alone, although when I made the decision, because I became less and less willing to acquiesce to the pieces of the National School Lunch Program that I was not comfortable with, which was the sweetened cereals, the highly processed stuff, breads, those kinds of things that I knew were not healthy and were spiking the glycemic index on kids when they were eating them. And so I became convinced that what we needed to do, and there's a price tag to it, as you alluded into your remarks about the financials related to the school lunch program. There's financial benefits for the schools to get in line and salute smartly and charge up the hill. And so to make a conscious decision to move away from that meant it was going to cost us more money to feed our kids. And fortunately, our school board at Guthrie was on board with it.
When they were having that conversation about, okay, it's going to cost more money to do this, where did the school board decide to pull money from? Because, Guthrie is a unique situation. Like you said, you're right in cattle country. You have access to things. Granted, your produce and dairy is now traveling quite a bit of ways to get to you, but where were they making those financial concessions?
At the end of the day, it's the superintendent that has to recommend to the board what the budget looks like, and the board accepts it or they don't. And so what I began to do is whittle in the areas where I thought we might have some fluff. If I thought we could get by replacing tires, after 50,000 miles instead of 40,000 miles, just little bits and pieces here and around. And again, context is important. At Guthrie at that time, we were serving about 120 kids. It's a little bit easier to run an experiment with 120 kids than it would be for Dallas ISD, with several 100,000. But that goes in pretty much in all things that you're doing. I mean, we could be a little more, we did some very innovative, edgy kind of things in relation to technology back then at Guthrie too, because it didn't take that much money to experiment. I mean, you could run an experiment with a device of some kind or another and spend $7,000, and it might crash and burn completely, and you lost $7,000, not $7 million. And so that's a little easier explanation to your stakeholders than the others. And also, too, and this is one of my mentors is fond of saying that every decision is a political decision. And absolutely, that's the truth. And he follows that up and he says, it's not that you have to kiss the ring, but you better know how the game's played. And so in the context of Guthrie, it's in King County, Texas, the third least populated county in the nation. So it was not hard for me to have the same conversations with everybody in the county that I'm having with you. I mean, the reach is much more attainable when you're trying to have communications with your stakeholders. And of course, trust always goes into those kinds of conversations and decisions. But again, the smallness of the population also helps you develop trust. Sometimes when it's more difficult for someone, perhaps in in Allen, Texas, the superintendent there, he or she just cannot talk to every stakeholder in the community. Just can't get it done.
I was thinking whenever I lived in Oakland and you want to make change, like how do you start? And then you move to Lockhart and you want to make change and you know 3 people on city council and you know it's just easier to wrap your arms and mind around making change in a small place.
Yeah. Well, and that's literally what I was going to say and thinking. We have landed in the perfect place because there are people who are like us, who are interested and who want this information, and we're reaching out and getting involved, and they're so happy that we reached out and that they want us to be involved. So yeah, Allen, little big, Lockhart, a perfect experiment to get this going so that we can share it to a larger audience. So this is very exciting.
So, Joe, if I can, let me go back and put one more piece of that puzzle in place, the actual divorce with the school lunch program, because it took me the longest. I had to ask people at several different levels, how do I do this? And, you know, I would get a lot of hand waving and, you know, this kind of stuff. And so it took me a while to find out who I needed to talk to. And they finally put me in touch with a lady from the Texas Department of Agriculture. And the U.S. Department of Agriculture basically oversees the school lunch program. And so I finally got in contact with her and had a phone conversation. And she said, so before you do this, tell me, I want to hear what you're talking about. She said, specifically, tell me what you're doing. And I said, well, we decided we wanted to supplant conventionally grown produce with organically grown produce. She said, that's not a problem. I said, I didn't think it would be. She said, what else? And I said, well, we want to feed only grass-fed and non-medicated meats and not hormone-induced meats. She said, it's not a problem. I said, I didn't think it would be. Then I said, we only want to serve whole milk and real butter. Ooh, that might be a problem. And I said, I thought it might be. I said, I want to eliminate completely the highly processed grains and sweetened grains. Ooh, no, that would not be in compliance. I said, that's why we're having this conversation. I want to have a divorce.
Yeah. We have irreconcilable differences, ma'am.
Right. And so she and I talked for most of 30 minutes. It was at least 20. And we got to the end of that conversation and she says, well, here's the process you got to go through. And it meant me writing a letter and copying several different people up the food chain. And I said, okay, I will do that. And you'll have a copy of that probably before the day's over. And she said, before I let you go, Doc, I want to say something. And I said, okay. She said, you sound exactly like my oncologist for the last 3 years. And I said, you have cancer? And she went, yes. And the things you're saying is exactly the same things my oncologist has been telling me for the last 3 years. But you won't be in compliance with the National School Lunch Program.
Well, I'm interested to know who this oncologist is, because we had an oncologist that wasn't talking about that at all and literally watched my partner Dion get healthier and healthier and healthier and not one time ask her what she was doing. Yep. They knew from the very beginning that we were going to be as natural as possible and we wanted to do just the minimum amount to get her through this. And that person did not ask at all, even when we would volunteer about diet and exercise and all the things that we were doing, like didn't need to know. So I say hooray that at least her oncologist was talking to her about this. So
well, you've probably heard Dr. Edwards and in his testimony, he'll talk about his physician's assistant there in Post that had celiac disease, and Ben watched the man heal himself through this process, and with semi-unbelieving eyes the whole time it was going on.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yep.
You know, and it's interesting because the people in the infusion room would tell Dion how good she was doing, and they couldn't believe it, and that her numbers were even better. One of the nurses said, your tumor markers are better than mine. and she didn't have cancer.
Right.
So it's just like, and nobody's asking, nobody
Right.
wants to know.
Right.
Anyway,
Right.
that's why we're here shouting from the rooftops.
Yep, that's okay. That's okay. I read a few years ago that even in the field of medicine, when there are enough irrefutable studies to change practice, it still takes 17 years to get traction in the marketplace. It's hard to believe.
Well, you know what? I believe that's media. And that's the people talking about it.
Yeah, and the influence of big money, big agriculture, big pharma, big grocery.
Yep.
I mean,
exactly.
And I mean, you all are probably aware that the food pyramid got turned upside down.
That's
2 or 3
literally
weeks ago.
What I was about to talk about, because now all those grains that they were trying to feed to the kids, that's no longer in the food pyramid. So I'm really excited to see how school lunches are going to be mixed up. And I also want to say, thank heavens they were cooking real food for your kids at Guthrie. I'm like, my Lord, y'all get meat? What do they feed? I asked some kids the other day, what do y'all eat? And they were like, pizza.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And
which qualified as a vegetable there for a while.
A vegetable?
Because of the tomato sauce on it. Yes. For a while, it qualified as vegetable because of the tomato sauce that was on it.
Oh my goodness gracious!
I know. But to your point, Crystal, we had been doing this at Guthrie for I don't know 3 or 4 years, and we had the regional service center people come out that oversee the cafeteria services and all the schools in that region. And before they left the building that day, they stopped by my office and they said, one of the most remarkable things we saw? And I said, what? And they said, your kids weren't throwing food away. He said, most of the schools we go in, they take those platters and just dump piles of food into the trash can before they leave. He said, your kids were licking the platters clean. And I said, good. It's good food. We want them to eat it.
Yes. This isn't prison. We're trying to make them healthy and strong.
So you wrote the letter asking for a divorce. Was it just granted? Was there a process after that?
Yeah. No, I mean, it was just basically a box check, and these people, and actually it was somewhat liberating because then I was no longer subservient to all the monitoring, regulation, and oversight of the school lunch program. All those people telling us, we had an audit here at Jayton back in the fall, and one of the findings or one of the dings that they gave us in the audit was that the cafeteria director was giving 1/8 of a cup too much something in the meals that she was preparing. And so that was
they're getting too much food.
Yeah.
Right.
1/8 of a cup.
An eighth of a cup, yes.
But who measured that? I want to know.
Well, it's the lady.
Did you measure everyone's plates?
The lady from the Texas Department of Agriculture that came out to audit us. Yeah.
Bureaucrats have no power. They don't feel power in their lives. Therefore, they have to exercise it in whatever way they can. And the moment we recognize people who are forcing and exercising power outside of where they should, we just bless their little hearts, and then we can deal with it better.
Bless their little hearts. Straight out of the South.
Yeah.
So how did you integrate the school garden that the kids are putting together into the cafeteria? Did you connect those two pieces at all?
Oh, yeah, absolutely we did. And the elementary teachers and the elementary kids just did a fabulous job of experimenting with starting plants indoors, starting plants outdoors. I mean, they did exactly what I wanted them to do, turn it into a marvelous learning experience. And good grief, at the number of tomatoes they produced. Yeah, everything that we could harvest during the school year, we fed across the counter during the school year. A lot of the things that we couldn't serve because we had an abundance, then the cafeteria ladies started preserving it in different manners, and so that we could use it in the subsequent fall when we came back. Mm-hmm. And so there was a lot of that going on. And then also we had such a surplus that we could share it with the community. I mean, we would say, we've eaten all the tomatoes we can eat. We've stored all the tomatoes we can store. Come get them. And boy, they did. You know, they would come harvest.
That's great.
And it was a public relations tool as well, not only, I mean, at several levels.
Okay, so I'm going to just announce the elephant in the room. You know, where we went to school in Jayton and then also in Guthrie, these are wealthy schools, wealthy school districts who have more money to spend, maybe have more leeway in pulling things from the budget and moving things around. Where we live in Lockhart, that's not the situation. So what,
Nope, it is not.
when you look at this idea of divorcing the National School Lunch Program, is that something that's actually feasible for the average school?
So it's a great question, Joe, and it's one that I put some thought into. The food pyramid got turned upside down in the last 2 or 3 weeks, as you know. And that's because the conversation that we are having is now one that's being had at the national level. It's not just in the podcast here and there. And the fact that that food pyramid changed tells, well, one of my mentors, who's now a Texas A&M emeritus professor, Dr. Shin, is fond of saying that which appears to be happening has already happened. And so I think the earth has already shifted significantly in that regard. And also the fact that Secretary Rollins is now in the federal administration in the driver's seat on this stuff. I think we're going to see it easier. One of two things is going to happen, and Crystal referenced bureaucrats earlier. I mean, bureaucracy has a life of its own, and it exists to protect itself. And in that sense, it's really no different than the rest of us. We almost always make decisions in our own self-best interest. But what I think we're going to see at the federal level is either a relaxing of the boundaries that constrain what schools are allowed to serve, or even a possible shifting. For instance, just like on that food pyramid, I mean, there's a shift in the dairy products that we have not seen. I mean, there's a clear shift toward more wholesome dairy products. Yep. And so I think the combination of those two things, the relaxation of the constraints that we've lived under and actual changing in the mindset, I believe it's going to make it easier for schools to do that. But again, back to your point, I mean, schools with tight budgets have tight budgets. I think there are enough people that think like we do now. For years, we've had athletic booster clubs and band booster clubs and drill team booster clubs. I think it's conceivable that we could create community booster clubs, nutrition booster clubs, that would just like an athletic booster club, engage in fundraising activities to help the school supplement their nutrition budget in the interest of providing more healthy nutritional options.
Well, and in harmony with that, if you have nutrient-dense food going into your band students and your athletes, then they're all going to perform better. So all of that, like all the booster clubs just combining underneath food and health.
Correct. Yep, I agree.
Well, and I want now every school should have a garden. Like we're working with the high school right now, but I'm like, man, as we sit and watch these kids with this nothing behind their eyes and we ask them about food as they're eating their Takis and drinking a soda, we need kids to know about food and healthy food at an earlier age. So,
and participating and growing it, just like we talked at the the beginning. Nature is a miracle, and when you get up close and personal with it, it changes you.
Yep, absolutely.
So you're doing this at school, but you also walk the walk in your own life. So tell us a little bit about what y'all have going on at your ranch.
Well, my lovely bride of almost 49 years now, and I mean, as I look at her life, only one day can I question her judgment, but I'm thankful that she made that choice. But when I retired at Guthrie in 2015, then our ranch is in the north part of Kent County, Texas, about halfway. If you draw a triangle between Wichita Falls, Lubbock, and Abilene, our ranch is right smack in the middle of that triangle. And it's also referred to, truly, it's referred to as the Big Empty. I mentioned that King County, Guthrie, is the third least populated county in the nation. We live in the 10th least populated county in the nation. But she and I, God has blessed us currently with the stewardship of about 1,000 acres of property. When I retired at Guthrie in 2015 to become her sole ranch hand, one of the first things she did is she said, I've been watching videos of a guy named Jeff Lawton out of New Zealand, who is a disciple of Dr. Bill Mollison out of New Zealand, who wrote the permaculture textbook. I mean, I've got it here on the desk. Permaculture, the design manual. And so they've been proponents of this way of thinking and way of the three tenets of permaculture, you may or may not know, or one is care of the planet, care of the people, return of surplus. And so my wife, all of her family calls her Mo. When I retired at Guthrie in June of 2015, she says, you and I are fixing to take a course together, online course. And I said, okay. And I always tell her, okay. I said, what's it going to be? And she says, we're going to take a course in permaculture together. And she showed me that book, which I've got it right here. Let me show you. I mean, this is not a book. This is like a tome. They should have put wheels on it. But anyway, at the end of the taking of that course, I ended up being a certified permaculture consultant, whatever the heck that means. I've never made any money doing that. But it certainly enlightened me with regard to how we can better understand the way nature works, leave a lighter footprint on nature as a result of our being here, and accept nature's willingness to sustain us and provide for us if we'll work with her instead of against her. And so we ended up learning a lot about growing things, about managing water, managing land, managing critters with the way we move them, the way we feed them, compost options, building swales in lands that have slope. We run our entire house on rainwater now. And there's just a whole lot we've learned in that process. Probably somewhere around 2017, she bought an 8 by 12 greenhouse kit that she started growing some food in. After that, I extended it to be 8 by 16, and then during the pandemic, I ended up just building a 10 by 44 foot greenhouse.
Wow.
That we have here on the ranch. And so she's a remarkable gardener. Really, you should be talking to her and not me. But we have, in following the discipline of Jeff Lawton and Bill Mollison, we have planted what they call pioneer species trees, and then between them, fruit trees, nut trees, those kinds of things. So we have increased the productivity of our Zone 1, Zone 2, and Zone 3 here at the ranch, the area, the geographic area most central to the house, so that we have raised beds on 3 different sides of the house, and different plants enjoy different spots, just like different people enjoy different spots. Mm-hmm. And we've created some nice processes and systems for the creation of our own compost without it being too terribly labor intensive, and by use of our cattle. And we have a neighbor, a young man farmer, that knows that we like hay that has not been sprayed with anything, so he keeps us supplied in clean hay. And so that allows us to do the sheet mulching. I know that you all are familiar with sheet mulching, and then also the compost and water, the moisture preservation effects of hay in that regard. Man, there's just a lot of stuff there, Jill.
No, that's fine. And we did, you could and would talk forever.
Yes.
But you know, that's one of the things that I don't know a lot of people in West Texas, where we're from, that are actually growing food on their land for their families to eat. You know, most of them, it's just production crops or, you know, grazers for their animals. I'm assuming y'all are completely self-sufficient. You only go to the grocery store for the staples. Are y'all able to provide yourself with everything you need? Are y'all self-sufficient?
That's an interesting question, and Mo and I have that conversation a lot, and especially we had the conversation during the pandemic when we saw a run on groceries and the lockdown of so many different things and the curtailing of movement, transportation, commercial transportation. So to answer your question, and we've gone through several iterations of nutrition ourselves, and I think I mentioned this to you all when you visited my office. The current iteration is we're pretty much plant-based eaters. It's not that we have any philosophical or ethical problem with eating of meat, but through her research, we've decided at our age and our context, we're healthier when we eat plant-based. So, but to your point, yeah, we buy some food from the grocery store. Most of what we buy is organically produced now. We buy rolled oats because we don't want to spend the time rolling oats, you know.
Exactly.
And so now we can get organic rolled oats, and the same thing with walnuts, and the same thing with Brazil nuts, and those kinds of things that would be very difficult for us to grow here. But if everything went to hell in a handbasket today, she and I could just keep living and eating and not have a problem. We would never starve, ever. She saves seeds from the plants, lettuce and kale and collards and all that stuff. And she just constantly has new starts going on, sitting on top of the freezer in the pantry where it's a little warm and get them going. We have grow lights in our utility room to get things growing. And so we could eat. And then also we have a stock pond that we've stocked with fish, and we know that it's clean. And then we have cattle that we have processed them in the past. For a while, when we were still eating meat regularly, she and I would order 50 Cornish rock chicks a couple of times a year or 3 times a year. Those are the sort of the Arnold Schwarzenegger species of chicken. You know, they put on weight rapidly. But we would raise them for 6 weeks and then call our daughters and their husbands and whatever grandkids were on the ground at that time. And we would have a big chicken slaughter day. And so the 3 families would slaughter 50 chickens, and each one would take 17 or 18 chickens home with them. And everybody had blood on their hands, but they were grass-fed chickens. I built tractors and I walked them along to feed them rather than throwing processed grain at them. And funny story about that, if we got time, during one of those events, my youngest daughter, Mackenzie, was teaching in an online school, a national online school. And we were coming up toward the Thanksgiving, Christmas holiday time of the year. And one of the ladies that she taught with asked her in a conversation what Mackenzie and her family were going to do for Thanksgiving. This lady was from Houston. And Mackenzie said, well, we're going to do this on Wednesday, this on Thursday, and on Friday we're going to have a chicken killing. And so this woman from Houston says, you're going to do what? And so Mackenzie described our family, our collective family, processing chickens 2 or 3 times a year. And so the woman said, you know, that's never been on my bucket list until now. Can I come? And she drove from Houston out here on the Friday of Thanksgiving week and helped us process 50 chickens.
That's amazing.
I love it.
Just because she'd never done it before.
Yeah.
But so I kind of ran
that's great.
off your question.
the conditions of where we grew up. I mean, it's rugged country, but the fact that that you can grow your own food, you can be self-sufficient, sustainable. I appreciate other people hearing that. Now, I want to jump back in before we close things out. What were the things that you started noticing in your students and in the faculty once, as a group, as a community, y'all changed your mindset on food and nutrition and started doing things differently? What were the things that you noticed?
Well, that's a tangled web, Joe. So I'll go back to that graduate profile that we created, because it was much more focused on the whole person than just the academic person. And so from the position that I held at that time as the superintendent of schools, even if it was a small community, I mean, what comes with that is a microphone. And I have the ability to speak to, and in a lot of cases on behalf of a lot of people. But the message I kept hammering consistently, and not only, I'm in my third book, which is about organizational culture, I talk about the ways of thinking, ways of behaving, and ways of symbolizing being the triad that shapes cultures. And so I saw it as a personal responsibility, not only for me to model the behaviors, the way I behaved, but also to teach and encourage learning along those lines, which is the way of thinking, and then also the way of symbolizing what we believed, which was the student's website, which was the way we organized professional development days, which was the way I refashioned our evaluation tools for the teachers and the staff, built around that profile and that way of thinking. And so that holistic wellness lens was always there in every conversation. It's and rather than how can we improve our math scores, it's about how do we improve the prospects for Crystal and Johanna to have a happy, productive, and healthy life 20 years from now, 30 years from now, 40 years from now. What do we need to do? What is our responsibility in making that happen? So it just completely shifts the conversation. Back to your question, when we made those shifts in the lunchroom, I mentioned to you already that one of the first things that we noticed was the kids were eating the food and not throwing it away. I mean, you can crack open a can of green beans all you want to and put a little batch on the plate and they're going to throw them away. But if you cook some fresh green beans and a little bit of butter, they gobble those babies up, you know? Yeah. And so those things were not unnoticed. Then I began to get reports from the coaches, the athletic coaches, telling me, you know, afternoon workout is different. I mean, the kids seem to be running on a higher level of energy at 3 and 4 in the afternoon than they were before, which did not surprise me because it's slow burn food versus fast burn food. And then I would have parents tell me, you know, when Johnny comes home at dinner after football practice these days, he is not rummaging through the refrigerator trying to fill up a cavern like he used to. I mean, it's like he comes in, takes a shower, and waits on dinner. That it was, they were seeing what you and I know was the body's reaction to real nutrition versus fake food, or as Dr. Edwards calls it, food-like products. And so those were, and then I mentioned to you the folks at the Region Center noticing that our students, when they finished lunch, their plates were empty. You know, they weren't dumping it in the trash. And so that's very affirming. That's affirming for the people that work in the cafeteria.
Well, and I know that Guthrie, the students already perform at a higher level just because the kind of education that we got in Jayton and the kids got in Guthrie. Did you see test scores go up at all?
Our kids performed well even before, so we didn't see marked improvement in that regard. I mean, when you're at a 95 already, it's hard to
brag.
It's hard to move the needle a lot more. I don't mean to say that in a condescending way at all, because I worked in the large schools in Austin too. I mean, I understand the challenges to go with it.
How about behaviorally? Did you have any issues that you saw better, or was it the same thing?
So that's an interesting point, Crystal. Yeah, we did see improvement in behavior, particularly some of the students that were dealing with emotional kinds of stuff. It was kind of interesting that the nutrition seemed to have an impact on the way they, in psychology terms, the way they could self-regulate,
Yep.
which was interesting to me.
Well,
Teachers also, I forgot to mention this, teachers would also mention to us how the common model shows when kids eat Fruit Loops or Cocoa Puffs and chocolate milk for breakfast, then about 9:30 or 10, they bottom out, But we weren't seeing that again. I mean,
Yeah.
we were getting good, solid performance throughout the morning
Yeah.
after a whole healthy breakfast.
Well, our gut health is directly related to our emotional health. And so
Indeed.
when we're
Indeed.
eating organic food that hasn't been blasted with chemicals that are killing the live bacteria and
Agreed.
and microbiology in our gut.
Yep. Yep. And to the point Joe's made a couple of times already about us not even being close to understanding nature yet. And this is 2 points. One, I hear a lot of people gnashing of teeth and tearing of cloth, worrying about the artificial intelligence. I think the artificial intelligence is going to accelerate our understanding of nature and healthcare in remarkable ways. It's going to be able to synthesize and connect dots that we have not previously been able to do that. One of the interesting pieces to me, because I've had my nose, even when you all were in high school, I was already sticking my nose in neuroscience. As a teacher, I was trying to figure out how can I cause learning to happen and how can I cause it to happen faster and better and stick longer. And so what we're seeing in relation to the comment you made, the connection in gut health and overall health, the neurological connections that run, neurological infrastructure is not bound by our cranium. We're learning more and more about that. It goes right down to our gut.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, our gut sends more information to our brain than our brain sends to our entire body.
Yep.
So this is like, we're all like, oh, we're so smart in our brain. Like if your gut isn't healthy, then your brain isn't very smart.
Correct. Yep.
All right, we need to round this out. So is there anything that we didn't ask you that's important to tuck in before we duck out?
No, I always enjoy visiting with you all and happy to answer the questions that you have. I know that you all know a lot of people. You don't know anybody more blessed than I am. And largely it's because I've been able to interact with people like you all and had the opportunity. God's put me in places where I've had the opportunity to interact with smart people and committed people and passionate people for about 55 years now. So I don't know how many years I have left, and I really don't care. I'm increasingly coming to the point that I'm not sure time means anything at all anyway. But I'm thankful to have you all in my circle, and I hope our conversations will
Yes,
continue.
I think we need to have a tech
Forever.
education conversation at some point. What year did you show up in Jayton?
1989. Fall of 1989. I pretended to be an athletic coach for a while and finally came to the conclusion that so many others beat me to that I wasn't a very good athletic coach and I needed to do something.
Well, you were my track coach and I hated track, but you were a good track coach. And you were my favorite math teacher.
Well, thank you.
I think I had algebra 2, maybe. I don't know what else with you, but yes, you always had your guitar in the classroom, and once we'd start working, you'd start playing the guitar. I think that was helpful.
Yep. Yeah. It's not typical. I still play 20 or 30 minutes every day. It's that guitar. The guitar is my second best friend.
Behind Mo, I'm assuming. Good answer.
Yes.
Well, so you love to pontificate, and you do a pretty consistent blog. I think you post a couple times a week. So if Dr. Nelson Coulter has piqued your interest, you can read his work at nelsonwcoulter.com. and that's Coulter. Coach, thank you so much for who you are and what you do and for being here with us. And I'm so excited that you're the interim superintendent. You came out of retirement for Jayton. Yes.
What a blessing.
And Crystal and I have been putting together a business plan to share with you, something for the students and actually for the county and the surrounding counties, something that we know needs to happen. And Jayton Independent School District seems like the right person to roll it out. So we will be in touch with you very soon with that.
Yes.
Okay, cool.
All right.
Thank you so much. We love you. We appreciate you.
Yep.
Yeah. Keep shining your light and letting your voice be heard. We appreciate
Yep.
you so much.
I love you back.
Love
Always
you,
will.
Coach.
Thank you.